All right, welcome back to my pandemic garden. I'm Spencer, and in this episode, I'm just gonna talk about work. All right, now I just have to address the fact that there's gotta be someone out there who's thinking that there's an easier way to do it. You know, like instead of using a hoe, you could have sprayed. Instead of spraying, you could have put down plastic. Instead of hoeing, you could have put down straw. And I will eventually put down straw in this garden to keep the weeds down, but I just gotta say right off the bat, right out of the chute, that I've always seen gardening, since my first garden, which was 20 years ago, I've always seen gardening as an opportunity to work, not as a way to avoid work. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't productive, time-saving measures that I take and that pretty much everyone should take out there gardening. You know, I don't water with a cup of water, taking it from the well to each plant one at a time. Although I have used buckets to water. Actually, the first 5 or 6 gardens I actually had, I used rain barrels and buckets to carry the water. But anyway, that's a different story. So I do think there are some time-saving, labor-saving measures that you should take when you're gardening. You have to, and you will, and whatnot. But for me, I often just jump at the opportunity to use a hand tool. This hoe is so small. What is that, 5, 6 inches across? This garden is tremendous. It's gonna take me all day to weed this garden, and even then it's not gonna be done. I just don't see that as some kind of liability. I think there's a way of looking at work as a waste of your time. You know, like you'd rather be doing something else. You know, that idea that like your time is worth more than that. In this space of the garden, I just don't even think that way at all. This is just an opportunity to cultivate the land, cultivate the plants, and an opportunity to work. And in the end, you end up with what you end up with. Sometimes the food is great, sometimes it gets eaten by bugs, and it's a bit of a crapshoot, but in the end, for me, it's just invaluable. I'm just gonna show you the one thing I don't like about a traditional hoe. They will scrape your weeds up, but they also kind of pull the soil in the direction that you're scraping. So I find that after a while, using a hoe, I end up having to kind of shovel the dirt back. Okay, this bad boy is the scuffle hoe. Basically, it allows the soil to pass through this hole while you're scraping. That way you're knocking out the root structure of the weeds, and then the soil kind of passes through here. It also just wiggles a little bit, and that wiggle is pretty key. That allows you to scrape in 2 directions. So when you're scraping forwards, or I guess it's backwards. When you're scraping backwards, you're pulling this way, and then the blade oscillates and allows you to go this way. So scrapes in 2 directions, sometimes called a hoop hoe, sometimes called an oscillating hoe. So this whole conversation about work and gardening, it makes me think about something my dad used to say. His perspective is that whatever work you're doing, you need to measure the value of it and then weigh it against the equal value of what you could just buy in the marketplace. What I mean by that is that if he was gardening, and he never would have been, but if he was gardening and say he's growing carrots or something, he would think, what's the cost of the seed? What's the cost of the water? What's your time worth? You know, what is your time worth was a big question of his. And then he would add that all up and compare that to the price of buying some carrots at the store. And inevitably, come on, when you think that way, you end up buying the carrots at the store. They just end up being cheaper and easier. And there's always that nebulous question of what your time is worth. You know, when I was a kid and he used to say that, my time was worth about $5 an hour, minimum wage. Now, what's my time worth? You know, on a contractor job, sometimes $50 an hour, but that's not $50 I get. You know, that's $50 I charge, and then I've got overhead and all that. So I still don't know what my time is worth. But here's the problem with that kind of math in my mind. It negates, it kind of ignores the value of work. Like there's actually a positive value in your life, potentially, I know in my life, to work, any kinds of work, whatever you're doing. So if I'm out here in the garden, I could take the value of the carrots, and then all of the other labor I put toward the carrots would actually be value added if I enjoy the labor. right now it's a Saturday morning, and man, I'm hoping to be out here till lunchtime, just running this scuffle hoe, taking care of the weeds, thinking about stuff. So it's just a different way of thinking about work. It took me a long time to grow out of my dad's view. That idea that you gotta sort of, you know, assess whether or not you should actually do a job based on the value of that job and the cost to hire someone else to do it. A lot of people think that way. For me, the cost of hiring someone else to do something is really, really high because I place immense value on doing it myself. All right, this guy might have been in the pot just a little too long, but I think it's gonna be okay. Planting peppers. These are guys we started inside. You'll see that when you see the plants, they're huge already. And here we go. Here's the peppers, and they're going in kind of near the tomatoes. We're doing tomatoes here, and then we're doing a row of onions, and then pepper, pepper, onion, pepper. So it's O-P-P-O-P.
These are Big Bertha. Them are some mature plants there, baby.
Is there any indication that the pepper supply is in danger? That's because I heard those pepper processing plants are getting hit pretty hard in the Midwest. You know? So it'd be like, okay.
Beautiful chicken.
Big Bertha's going in. How's the root development?
Yeah, there's a worm. I've never ever grown this. I like that you planted some peppers over the tomatoes. So.
You know that one? Alright, we got the peppers in. Almost all the way in. Melissa's got a few more down there she's putting in. And then I'm doing more onion sets. This is just the year of the onion set for whatever reason. You know, you can plant onions as seeds. That never works for me. You can plant them as little sprouts. That's awesome if you can get them. Or you can do sets. These are good. Like little mini onions. They become big onions. The best way to do this is to chop your rebar and put like 10 of them on one board, all sticking out. And you just plop 10 holes at a time. This is a slow method. But I guess I've kind of got the slow gardening thing going on because it doesn't really bother me. Or for those following along at home, T-O-P-P-O-P. Tomatoes, onion, pepper, pepper, onion, pepper. All right, there's just one more thing I want to say about work in relationship to the garden and just everything I'm doing out here in the pandemic garden. And for this, I'm going to illustrate it by throwing the drone up. And you can see as we go up that, you know, we got a barn and we're surrounded by some nice woods and stuff, but the further up you go, the more you can see that on two sides we are surrounded by farmland. And I'm talking like big farms, you know, 100+ acre spreads. And those guys grow 2 crops. Year in, year out, 2 crops. That's how agribusiness works in this part of the Midwest. We're in central Illinois. They grow soy and they grow corn. And that's not corn on the cob you can eat and soy for your edamame and your tofu and stuff. No, no, no. That's corn and soy to feed hogs and cattle and livestock and to make ethanol. So there's got to be some kind of complicated formula we could work up, which has the work you put out in your garden in some complex relationship to the scale of that garden. So if you're doing container gardens on a patio versus raised beds versus a small garden plot or a bigger one like ours, or you're getting on to a bigger scale, there's got to be an equation to kind of pay attention to that. A lot of what I do in this garden is just irrelevant and not workable on a bigger scale. And a lot of what you would do on a bigger scale just doesn't work here. I could run a small tractor on this spread, but only at the beginning of the season. It just would be kind of irrelevant on this kind of a small garden. So there's just got to be some attention to scale if you're thinking about work in the garden. And the other just kind of funky thing about looking at the farms that we're surrounded by is, of course, thinking about the way that so much of our farming, at least in this part of the Midwest, is not about growing food for people to eat. It's about agricultural business on a much different scale that's dependent on international markets. It's not just about growing food for people to eat. In some ways, I think this pandemic has highlighted how it can be unfortunate to not have locally grown food and locally produced commodities, just because those big international networks are kind of fragile, and at this point their breakdown is leading to some shortages. All right, that's a little doom and gloom here at the end of my pandemic garden video. Thanks for checking it out. I appreciate your comments down below. If you want to get on my map of pandemic gardens, just send me your zip code and any kind of little note. I have a map down below. You can click in the description. You'll see the link to just, you know, other people who are gardening with the pandemic in mind. This idea of responding to the pandemic in some ways by getting your hands dirty and getting out in the garden. All right, thanks for checking it out. I'll see you in the next video.